Find more at businessoftruth.com to subscribe for our full stories and free download. History has always been a constant test of the aptitude and intelligence of humanity. One thing that history has taught us is that if we get something wrong on a large scale, it can cause real problems, and mankind had made some big mistakes. Now, the world had a very big problem. Unfortunately, whoever controls the airwaves decides the reality of what becomes fact or fiction, and what most of the public consider to be the truth is entirely up to them. This is nothing new, and propaganda has been the keystone of empires for millennia. Only by the 21st century, it had reached a whole new level of sophistication. The greater the lies, the more mechanisms it takes to cover them up. But whoever pulled the strings from the shadows controlled the puppets. By owning nearly every major source of information, the deep state had monopolized on the information industry. This is the fifth estate, capable of pushing a fake narrative until it starts to shape the reality in which people are forced to exist. Of course, this facade also relies on the fact that Joe Public is a bit daft. Put someone in a suit or a uniform and most people won't ask any questions. By 2020, it was becoming clearer than ever before that it's possible for the media and celebrity talking heads to completely dictate the opinions of much of the general public. The world was under their spell. The fact-check system was in place, and they had plenty of reputable clowns to make sure that they could always get the official seal of approval. Then, if there was any pushback going around the internet, the big tech boys could step in and make sure that any unwanted content could be buried or pushed away from the gaze of the masses. Of course, they would make the excuse that this was all for our own good, and that people who didn't share the correct opinion on a topic might become a danger to the rest of us. This was information fascism, and it was most critical for hiding the truth about what lurked in the darkness. To conspire on this level was almost unimaginable for the minds of most decent folk, but this only made it easier to get away with crimes of such magnitude. They were way out of control. If only humanity had heard the many warnings from the past about the Orwellian future where freedom could be taken away from us in a flash, all in the name of security. Our government would save us from ourselves if we would just kindly trust our government with our lives. Now, we were living through exactly what we were told to avoid. The Trojan horse which was being driven into the minds of the masses was to consist of confusing liberal ideas and social justice. People would be made to feel that their group in society was being victimized by the rest of society. This way, people would turn on each other and society would become divided and volatile, and this is exactly where their enemies wanted them. This effect was never more fascinating than when Donald Trump entered the political scene in 2016. By the time he was appointed as president after the election, there had already been more than 20 attempts on Mr. Trump's life. And although these attempts failed, what was really monstrous was the assault on people's minds. This would prove to be the most extensive, orchestrated character assassination in history. and poor Mr. Trump was the target. They hated Trump because Trump was not one of them. The brief was very clear. Create mass hatred for Mr. Trump and accuse him of anything and everything that was negative. This would be the real global pandemic. Within his first couple of years, the new president was well on his way to making America great again. Before Mr. Trump, the US had been under attack by government infiltration who were under the control of the deep state, and their plan was to smash America so that their globalist enterprise could pick up the pieces. US industry had been sold off to foreign competitors, and the streets of the deep state-run cities had become like third-world ghettos, with illegal immigrants flooding across the borders and dangerous prisoners being set loose on the public. Hidden within the governments of many nations was an insidious criminal network which was coordinating control from a centralized think tank. These were the men without faces, orchestrating Earth's future from the shadows, and they'd been running their filthy racket almost unchallenged for longer than grannies have been able to knit woolly jumpers. It was much worse than the public could have imagined, and the deep state had been creating devastation across the world as they cashed in on war, pharmaceuticals, and fiddling the world economy. They were dealing arms to tyrants, dangerous drugs to the public, and even supplying children to the perverts which they chose to run the world. If there was a demand for it, the deep state would create a supply, and with so many people involved in the operation, they could get away with bloody murder, and things even worse than that. With the growing awareness of the narcissistic lunatics which had come to swamp this military-industrial machine, the media managed to culminate blame for this entire greedy corporate model onto none other than Mr. Trump. Now, if this wasn't a case of the pot calling the kettle black, then I don't know what was. Donald Trump had always been a well-loved family man who had successfully lived the American dream like he was in a movie. He loved America, and he realized that she needed his help. There was no place for a good guy in their rotten system, and so they launched their massive attack. Now, everything that Donald Trump said or did would be twisted in the media to make him look bad. Their garbage was on superdrive as they pumped out their daily hog's wallop, calling out Mr. Trump as a Russian collaborator or a rapist. A barrage of lies would be circulated to add fuel to the fire of disdain which now burned in the hearts of the general public. What they didn't realize is that they too were the victims of this assault. Ordinary people who had never made a peep against any of the deep state political clowns in the past were now armchair activists against tyranny, and the tyrant, they were told, was Trump. The establishment politicians had to convince the world that they should be the ones back in control of the most powerful nation on earth because of the total shitstorm which they created. By labeling Mr. Trump as a racist, sexist, homophobic, corrupt, and greedy bastard, the world was offered a scapegoat, while they avoided the public gaze. The true culprits were stoking the flames so that they could turn all their crime back onto Mr. Trump. Hollywood had become an echo chamber of the deep state liberal doctrine, and they could use their impressive acting skills to express just how deeply they despised Mr. Trump. They had weaponized virtue signaling, and the more they hated Trump, the more righteous they became. The agents of the devil were showing their true colors, but they were all getting paid handsomely for their position within the predator class. As most people watch plastic celebrity crap a lot more than they followed reality, millions of people jumped on the bandwagon. By 2020, hating Donald Trump had become more fashionable than your sister's leg warmers in the 1980s. As you would expect from a political movement built on pure hatred, anyone who was a supporter of Mr. Trump would also become a target. Now political speech was being openly repressed as if we were back in the USSR, with a mob of mind police ready to judge anyone who said the wrong thing. If anyone followed Trump and Trump was a racist, then apparently that made them racist too. All it took was to repeat the same lies so many times that people would accept that they must be true. So despite the tens of millions of people who were on Team Trump, they would all be labelled as a bunch of rednecks who drove around in pickup trucks trying to lynch Negroes, while his black supporters would be accused of being traitors to their own kind. They had been judged in the eyes of the liberal media, and the public joined in like Lord of the Flies. This was to become one of the greatest hypocrisies of modern times. You see, while the same people were getting their knickers in a twist about fighting prejudice, Trump's people were being treated worse than a nonce in a playground, just for expressing their opinion and supporting the most successful president in US history. What's worse is that to fight the supposed bigotry of Trump and his followers, anti-fascist movements conveniently appeared to violently oppose them, using pure fascism. Now, anyone who didn't echo their ridiculous mantras would be a target, and the hundreds of millions of dollars raised in the name of equality would go straight into the pockets of the Biden camp, and to pay for more street thugs to cause aggro. Apparently, black lives didn't matter enough to give them any of the cash, unless it was to bail them out of prison or buy them new weapons to smash up American cities. The public had been tricked into fighting the deep state war against Mr. Trump, while they were blaming Mr. Trump for somehow causing all their trouble. They even managed to defund police departments, just like Hitler did before he rose to power in the 1930s. This was good old order out of chaos. When Trump started to build a border wall, the liberal media blamed him for segregating Mexicans, and when he separated some of the children, they called him a monster. But what their media clowns failed to mention was that Trump was trying to stop their massive smuggling operations of drugs, arms, and human trafficking, and that many of the children were the victims of the sex trade. But strangely, they seem more concerned with Mr. Trump's personality. As long as you thought that you were on the right side of political righteousness, they thought attacking Trump was the best way to help out. Now Mr. Trump's hair, his skin color, and even his lovely wife were under attack. This man probably had to put up with more lies about himself than anyone who's ever lived. But only those who had a grasp on reality could see just how ungrateful and easily led many people had become. Trump had given up his comfortable lifestyle and risked everything to drain the swamp, which was rotting away the foundation of his precious country, as well as most of the world. The real reason why Trump's enemies had gone to so much trouble to destroy him was because he was hunting them, and because their entire filthy satanic temple was in major trouble. Their crime network had become so widespread that they were having a hard time keeping a lid on it, but their disinformation system was so effective they could nearly always get away with it. If somebody tried to reveal any evidence of their crimes, the system would attack them as a conspiracy nutjob, and society would be taught to self-police each other's thoughts. Comply or become an outcast. They had a vision of socialism with an untouchable ruling class who had total control. This was the Hunger Games, and people had been spiritually devoured. Hillary Clinton had been making billions for being instrumental in a vast globalist crime syndicate, and her perverted husband had been free to swan about with Jeffrey Epstein, molesting minors, and the only thing that people could do was watch. To call her a nasty satanic bitch would be putting it politely, but a very powerful one nonetheless. Secret societies ensure that they all watch each other's back, and Hillary was a kingpin. Hillary was never meant to lose the election, and now a lot of people were getting very nervous. An eagle had landed in the viper's nest, and he too was hungry. While everybody was focused on bitching about him, Mr. Trump had been a busy boy. He'd used his impressive business acumen to undo all the stupid policies which had been put into place by the dickheads who preceded him. Their masters had made sure that the United States was being stomped under the heavy boot of the globalist regime, and this would have gone a lot worse. He had improved the US immeasurably, and the American people were really beginning to notice. Hillary was right to panic when she lost the 2016 election. Even though she had rigged the votes in several states, there was already an operation in place to make sure that she wouldn't be able to steal the presidency. If she had won, well, you don't even want to think about that. What these lunatics didn't realise was, while they were getting a hard-on spying on everyone, they too were being watched. And if anyone had something to hide, it was them. Their entire democratic model had been a fake. People were being used and abused, no matter who they voted for, and the last line of defence to protect the people from tyranny had been breached. Corrupt officials had installed their own system where they could flip the results of an election as fast as a tiddlywink. The global voting process was rigged, and the good guys were going to prove it to the world. Before they did this, Mr. Trump and the Patriots broke up the cartels and supply lines and the criminal institutions which protected them. Vast trafficking operations were dismantled, and the Federal Reserve was now under their control. Taxes and medical prices were slashed, and media censorship would finally be stopped. Now the people had a president. This was to be the greatest humanitarian mission in history, and people were about to genuinely experience freedom and democracy for the first time. The veil was being lifted after all these years, and now the cartel was getting so desperate, it was going to be a lot easier to catch them with their pants down. They were going to get a smacked arse. To many, Trump will be remembered as one of the most heroic figures in history because of what he'd done for ordinary people's lives, even the ones who hated him. But Trump didn't do all this alone. The evil empire who ruled the world never expected Q. Q was going to be their worst nightmare. businessoftruth.com